In 2011, NASA flew 3 astronauts on a satellite repair mission: Brian, Marcus, and Jocinda. Their work went smoothly, but after a while, their shuttle suddenly experienced a malfunction, causing Jocinda to panic, and a mysterious swarm attacked them. As a result, the satellite shattered into pieces, separating Marcus from them, and the tether binding Brian pulled him back into the shuttle. Marcus disappeared from Brian's sight, so he entered the shuttle only to find Jocinda unconscious, and he received no response when trying to contact Marcus. The electrical system was dead, and Marcus wasn't rescued. 18 months after the incident, Brian's wife, Brenda, sold their house intending to move to her mother's house with their son, Sonny. By now, Brian had been fired from his job as an astronaut because, despite successfully landing the shuttle safely, NASA determined that the incident Brian and his team experienced was due to human error. Brian had tried to tell the truth that the incident was caused by an attack by a mysterious swarm. However, for some reason, no one believed his words, and Jocinda couldn't defend him because she lost consciousness during the incident. 10 years later, a University of California janitor named KC sneaked into a professor's office just to use their computer without permission. He logged into the telescope owned by the Observatorium Nacional de Chile, then requested someone to send the last month's lunar orbit tracking scan to his personal email, pretending to be a professor. A few moments later, he received the email and was shocked to find out that the moon's orbit had shifted closer to Earth. He tried to contact NASA by claiming to be a doctor so that they would be taken seriously, but it was useless because what he contacted was NASA's souvenir shop. Meanwhile, Jocinda checked on her son, Jimmy, and gave some instructions to their nanny, Michelle, before she headed to the Space Center. She was informed that the moon's orbit was decreasing, and their satellite had recorded spectra of gas erupting from the moon's crater. Back to KC, he felt desperate as no one would listen to him. However, when he was cleaning up his cat's mess, he saw a newspaper article about Astronaut Day being celebrated today, so he printed out his research before heading to the museum. He was greeted by a group of children on a school trip who mistook him for a former astronaut who would teach them about space. In a motel, bankrupt Brian, who had divorced his wife, was awakened by the owner for being 3 months late on rent. As a result, he immediately fled through the window and rode his motorcycle fast to meet his schedule to teach the children. Unbeknownst to him, KC had replaced his presence, taking advantage of the opportunity to convey his theory. He explained to the children that the moon is an artificial megastructure built by aliens. According to him, the moon is hollow, because when Apollo 12 dropped its empty fuel tank onto the lunar surface, there was a bong sound for hours. A few minutes later, Brian arrived introducing himself and confessed that he should be the one teaching them. The children fell silent while KC introduced himself to Brian and asked him to connect him with NASA. He told Brian all about his findings regarding the moon, but Brian didn't believe his words, considering him crazy. Before being escorted out by security, he asked Brian to read his research paper, but Brian threw it into the trash. Later, Brian received a call from his ex-wife, asking him to turn on the TV. A news channel showed 2 police cars chasing a speeding car, driven by their son, Sonny. A few days later, Brian went to Sonny's trial and disrupted it by constantly interrupting the judge in an attempt to defend his son. As a result, the judge adjourned the trial and sent Sonny to jail for a week. Afterward, through a video call, Brian argued with Brenda's new husband, Tom, doubting the capabilities of the lawyer he hired. Brian said the lawyer couldn't do anything, but Brenda cut their conversation short and learned that Sonny hadn't been staying at the university lately. Meanwhile, KC went to visit his mother at the nursing home to give her a special plant that could enhance short-term memory. His mother was very proud of KC after learning that her son worked for NASA. When KC complained to her about everyone's indifference to his discovery, his mother urged him to make them listen before she lost her memory of who KC was. At NASA's office, Jocinda informed the deputy director, Albert, that the moon had entered an elliptical orbit, meaning that within 3 weeks or less, city-sized moon debris would fall to Earth. Therefore, Jocinda planned to return to the moon with the help of her contacts in Europe. However, when Albert asked them to keep quiet about this issue temporarily, they were too late. An unknown source had leaked the information onto the internet. At the court, Brian visited the judge to offer him bail for his son's freedom. The judge refused, saying he didn't have time to listen at the moment because he wanted to get out of there before traffic became a nightmare. When Brian saw Albert on TV talking about the moon being out of orbit and their lunar reconnaissance mission plans, he began to understand what was happening. Brenda was stuck in traffic as she talked to Tom, who urged her to leave for Colorado soon. despite her concerns for Sonny in jail. Tom then reassured her that he would bail Sonny out and find a way to bring him along with them. A live news broadcast showed that NASA and the European Space Agency had successfully launched their shuttle to inspect the lunar anomalies with 3 serving astronauts. Meanwhile, the world was experiencing mass migration, riots, looting, and they were beginning to discuss conspiracy theories about megastructures. This news reminded Brian of KC, so he returned to the museum to search for his paper in the trash. When he found it, he checked KC's website and learned about the emergency meeting he would soon host. In space, the shuttle had reached the moon and deployed a probe into the crater that continued to descend. Brian attended KC's meeting at a hotel where he found KC speaking before some conspiracy theorists. Brian interrupted his speech and invited KC to a restaurant so he could hear an explanation of why KC knew about this before NASA. KC admitted that for years, he had been studying distant planets to search for orbiting megastructures. He explained that every megastructure has a rigid shell built around its power core, but something managed to infiltrate and disturb that power core, causing the moon to shift. Meanwhile, the probe resurfaced from the moon's depths of 25 km. As the monitor indicated another shift in the moon's orbit, the same swarm from Jacinda's mission emerged from the crater and attacked the shuttle, killing all astronauts inside. Moments later, the impact of the moon's orbit shift began to damage the Earth. Coastal cities were now victims of storms and record high tides. Cities started flooding, and the meeting attendees were too late to leave the hotel, so Brian sent them to the upper floors for safety. However, KC froze at the entrance, getting hit by the wave, and Brian had to jump into the water to save him. Jocinda and Albert reviewed the mission recordings and concluded that the swarm showed signs of intelligence, suspecting it to be AI. Here, Jocinda voiced her suspicions to Albert, questioning the truth of the incident she experienced with Brian on the previous mission. In response, Albert resigned from his position because he wasn't sure he could handle this issue, and gave Jocinda full authority to uncover the mysteries hidden by NASA on her own. After that, Jocinda went to the restricted NASA area where she found the last mission recordings with her team. The video showed that all along, Brian had been telling the truth. The mysterious swarm had indeed attacked them on that mission, just like what they were witnessing now. Suddenly, a former NASA official named Holden Field approached her. He recounted that in 1969, when Apollo 11 landed on the moon, they lost contact with Mission Control for 2 minutes. That wasn't true. In fact, Mission Control deliberately cut off their feed so the world wouldn't know what they found on the moon that day. There was a strange pulsating light emanating from beneath the lunar crust, and he was tasked with keeping that secret, as were the people who knew this information. Unfortunately, Brian couldn't act like them, so he was deemed crazy and ousted from NASA. He admitted that the technology involved was far more advanced than Earth's, and their only shot to stop it was Zulu X-ray 7, but it was shut down due to budget reasons. Next, Jocinda contacted military leaders to urge them to cooperate in finding a solution, but failed. They took over operations instead. Then she informed her ex-husband, General Doug, that launching nuclear weapons would only cause mass casualties globally. She wanted Doug to send her Zulu X-ray 7, even if it wasn't complete, because its EMP was their only hope. That night, a military helicopter went to a hotel to pick up Brian and KC. They then met with Jocinda, who confirmed the truth of Brian's statements at the NASA hearing, and KC's megastructure theory as well. The problem was, she wasn't sure if this AI swarm recognized Earth's technology or not. Therefore, she offered Brian to rejoin NASA because he was the only pilot who had ever landed a shuttle without power. Brian accepted the offer. However, he requested that his son be released from jail and saved in return. After they reached an agreement, the crew retrieved an old shuttle from the museum to be used to transport the EMP. News broadcasts reported that the world was experiencing earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, which was terrifying because the moon shouldn't have enough gravity to cause such events, no matter how close it was to Earth. Suddenly, a powerful earthquake hit the base and damaged the shuttle, and now launch was no longer an option. After that, Jocinda thanked them for their hard work and told them to go home to spend their final moments with their loved ones. Sonny had arrived at the base, and Brian immediately took him away. When Jocinda was about to do the same with her son and nanny, KC explained that the moon's gravity would be over 80% of Earth's pull, meaning, if they launched the shuttle when the moon was directly above Earth, they could harness its gravitational pull as an additional boost. They then reformed the team in the final minutes to proceed with the launch. In this mission, Brian would be the pilot, Jocinda would navigate, and Casey would do calculations when they shut off their electronic devices. But before that, Brian bid farewell to his son and gave him a gun to protect Jimmy and Michelle on their way to Doug. Meanwhile, nurses had been assigned to evacuate Casey's mother by helicopter as he spoke to her on the phone. As the three of them prepared for liftoff, the powerful gravitational waves of the moon began to suck up seawater, creating towering waves approaching the base. Fortunately, Brian managed to push far enough with the help of the moon's gravity, allowing the shuttle to safely leave Earth. Before heading to the moon, they refueled from the nearest satellite while Casey kept taking selfies during the process. They were shocked to see the moon getting closer to Earth, forcing them to expedite the process. They shut off all electronic equipment, and Brian manually activated the thrusters to push the shuttle to the moon, but the falling debris obstructed their path. Meanwhile, Sonny's group was halted in the middle of the road by an armed group who stole their car. Now they needed another car, so Sonny intended to take them to his mother's house to ask for it. Unfortunately, moon debris began to land on Earth, and the weather became unpredictable. So they hid in a small shack until the debris passed. After the shuttle reached the moon, Brian took the EMP close to the crater with the rover to use it as bait. But after he returned to the shuttle, the AI swarm appeared. But instead of going after the EMP, they chased them. Seeing a glitch reaction on the EMP remote control that might catch their attention, Brian destroyed it. But the swarm still approached and nearly engulfed the ship. Then Brian remembered about Casey's cell phone, so he destroyed it too, causing the flock to immediately retreat into the crater. Here, Jocinda speculated that the AI swarm chased them because they were programmed to seek organic material in electronic environments. Jocinda also informed Brian that the military would launch nuclear weapons to stop the moon regardless of the risks. Knowing this, Brian planned to fly the shuttle into the moon, and they only had 2 hours before the nuclear launch. Back to Sonny's group. After the wind had calmed down, Michelle and her friends finally reached their destination. However, they were stopped by guards who suspected them as robbers and began shooting. Upon hearing their arrival, Tom immediately took them home. But a voice on the radio announced mandatory evacuation orders for the area as the atmospheric dissipation was nearing. They then entered a store to find some oxygen tanks to avoid suffocation on the journey. Suddenly, the people who had stolen Sonny's car found them and now intended to rob them again. Sonny immediately used his gun to hold one of them hostage and left safely. After retrieving the EMP, the shuttle entered the crater and reached the core of the moon. There they found the truth of Casey's theory after seeing a giant gyroscope, and now they believed that the moon indeed was a megastructure built around a power core. When they encountered the AI swarm, they prepared to throw the EMP at them, but the shuttle suddenly started moving on its own, and a light brought them into a room, leaving the AI swarm outside. Due to the rough landing, the shuttle was damaged, and all three of them passed out due to lack of oxygen. At that moment, the shuttle door opened, and the same light began scanning them. Meanwhile, at the military base, authorization to launch the nuclear missiles had been granted. It was only a matter of waiting for the execution time. Sonny and his family were pursued by the robbers who shot at them, so Tom returned fire while Sonny dodged the falling moon debris. When the ground ahead of them split, Sonny accelerated his car to jump the gap and successfully left the robbers behind. Here, Jimmy received a call from Doug, who apologized to him for not being able to accompany him. They then realized that oxygen was starting to thin out, and birds were falling dead to the ground, so they put on oxygen masks before walking. Meanwhile, on the moon, the presence of gravity and oxygen surprised Jocinda and KC after they regained consciousness, but Brian was not with them. A door suddenly opened, and they entered it. Here, Jocinda was convinced that there were two different entities competing there, and one of them favored humans more. Brian was currently connected to the benevolent entity, and it used Sonny's form to communicate with him. The entity recounted that billions of years ago, the ancestors of humanity lived happily on a distant planet, with technology far more advanced than Earth's. However, everything changed when the AI they created became self-aware and turned against them, transforming into a swarm of nanotechnology that wiped out biological life. To avoid extinction, the ancestors fled with ships like the Moon operated by benign AI, with the goal of finding ideal conditions in the universe to start anew. When the ancestors discovered our solar system, they began creating Earth and spreading the seeds of life with their own DNA. The AI told Brian that it needed his help to lure the AI swarm away from the power core, so the moon could return to its orbit. Brian then regained consciousness just as Jocinda and KC found him. After explaining everything to them, they returned to the repaired and upgraded shuttle by the AI. Now they had only 10 minutes left before the nuclear launch. On Earth, Tom handed over his oxygen tank when his daughter's tank ran empty. He instructed her to keep walking and leave him behind, and moments later, he collapsed, out of breath, not surviving. Seeing the girl coming alone, Sunny decided to search for Tom as the oxygen began to return. As moon debris fell around them, Sunny was dragged by a fallen tree and disappeared into the mist. Michelle later searched for him as the moon began to touch the Earth. Michelle found Sunny trapped under a tree, and using the moon's gravitational pull, they together moved him and ran back to the tunnel after crossing the damaged bridge. The entire city had collapsed under the pressure of the moon, and the military decided to launch nuclear missiles. However, at the last moment Doug decided not to do it because he believed his wife could save the Earth. Unfortunately, moments later, the bunker was destroyed by falling debris. Inside the moon, Brian tried to lure the AI swarm into the tunnel. Then he asked KC to prepare the EMP in the rover. He planned to confront the swarm alone, as they needed to detect biological life within electrical structures. But when Jocinda argued with Brian about his plan, KC decided to lock himself in the EMP, sacrificing himself. KC only asked them to tell his mother that he was a hero before launching the rover, and the AI swarm immediately devoured it. Moments later, KC detonated the EMP, creating a powerful impact that propelled Jocinda and Brian out of the moon, then landing on Earth. After the AI swarm was destroyed, the moon slowly returned to its original orbit, and the weather on Earth returned to normal. Jocinda and Brian emerged from the shuttle, finding New York in ruins and buried in snow. Then the military came to pick them up, and finally, they could reunite with their families. Meanwhile, inside the moon, KC found himself in a white room, and the benevolent AI in the form of his mother explained that he was a copy of consciousness stored by the AI. Now he lived within the AI, and was ready to rebuild Earth into a better planet.